Hello and welcome to another episode of Titanium Economy podcast series. Today we are joined by Gerald, who is a solutions manager and a technical fellow at Siemens and a seasoned leader in driving digital transformations across global industrial operations. Gerald has over 20 years at Siemens, and he has been at the forefront of applying AI, data, and digitization to unlock productivity, sustainability, and new value creation for industrial companies worldwide. Gerald's career spans senior technical and leadership roles, where he has helped Siemens shape its digital industry strategy and bridge the gap between advanced technologies and real world industrial adoption. His experience gives him a unique vantage point on how AI can scale in complex environments, what's working today, where the next breakthroughs may come from. Gerald, we are very excited to have you here, and thanks a lot for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Vineet, for your Aina podcast. I really appreciate that.
Perfect. Gerald, we'll first start with your journey. You have spent your career at Siemens, shaping their digital and AI-driven industry strategy. What first drew you to this space, and how has your focus evolved over time?
That's always great to look back because I have quite a career, and I have to tell you, my fascination started early during my time at university academia, where I did my master in of science in electric engineering, and I was fascinated by doing simulation of electric circuits at that time, combining the virtual world, how we call it today at the computers, with the physical world instead of building test beds there. And once I went deeper into that, it was all about control system design, digital algorithms, and we played around with fuzzy control and early neural networks. And also some research then at my computer science PhD when we went into autonomic computing. When you read that up in the past, I compared it, and it's pretty close what we talked today about agentic systems. And that was all prior Siemens already, where I caught fire. And then we went into, I wanted to join really a key player there. And I got lucky. I could join Siemens in the headquarters in Germany at a very strategic group. And that group was system software architects, and they were deployed at global scale to more or less help strategic projects with scalability, because Siemens knows data, scalability, and algorithms are always the biggest problem there. And I learned a lot over these first deployments. One, what I could point out was, just to give you an idea, think about that was 20 years back almost, when we got the task to create a service. We didn't talk cloud at that time, where we should replace the first level support of an IT help desk for typically computer errors by a full autonomous service. And the stakeholders heard about neural networks, and they came in and said, you need to do that with neural networks. That's the future. And we went in and said, fantastic. And we explained that. And based on that, I tried to explain them what neural networks are and what you need for that. And long story short, when we went through that process, we came up with a complex rule engine, which did at least 80% of the job. They are fully automated. And at that point in time, it was the right solution. And with my background moving forward, what happened then is I was appointed, and was at the right time, at the right point. Cloud computing was coming up, and I was asked to take over a corporate cloud program manager role in order to prepare Siemens for the cloud computing trend. And this, just to date that a little bit, we were then launch partner with Microsoft when Azure launched. So we worked with Microsoft on pre-testing there and pre-integration. And I just mentioned that because when you see now what's happening with AI, we are in a similar situation. From that on, I was asked then, hey, now we have understood cloud computing will change. It will become a mega trend. And I was asked to join the CTO office of Digital Industries, where really our automation business happens. And it's our center of automation. And with the mission, first of all, figure out what will cloud computing do and change AI-driven workloads, data-driven workloads. But what will it do as well when we come down to the shop floor and to the OT environments? We don't understand that. And lucky enough, I could lay out the foundation at that time for industrial edge computing, what we currently have in our, and we will talk later maybe a little bit more about that, our platform and infrastructure we have in the marketplace to enable really AI-driven workloads close to the process, leverage latest IT technologies. And from that onwards, I was always deployed in the strategic projects around AI, big data analytics. And meanwhile, we had then the IoT wave. And now current assignment, US market, differentiated technologies around AI, edge computing, MES, advanced scheduling, digital twin, virtual commissioning for US market customers. So combining the virtual and the real world at our customers.
No, that's very impressive, Gerald, and it's a pretty long tenure with a lot of different aspects of automation and digitization, that you've touched upon as part of the career. That's very impressive. One of the next things that I would love to understand from you is, right, Siemens, has been the pioneer in the digital industries. And from your perspective, what are some of the most significant lessons, learned in bringing AI and digitization into large-scale, complex operations within the industrials ecosystem?
Hey, great question, and I absolutely think we had many learnings. So what I explain here as lessons or learnings, I would say we made those ourselves. So the first one I would worth mentioning is definitely that wherever we went to, and at least from my point of view, we had to overcome this lack of AI understanding or awareness, and when it comes to data architectures and data processing, and especially when it comes to AI and Gen AI, because AI, as I mentioned 20 years ago in my introduction, we worked on that, and I had to resolve something there, explain them what you need to train a neural network versus working with a rule-based engine. And then when the last 10 years, in the last decade, we applied so much AI, which is hidden in products, and we didn't talk a lot about that. But over the last years, we started to talk more, apply AI, and people understood, you need a data strategy, you need a data architecture, you need maybe PhDs or data scientists. And they said, that takes longer and we need to be careful. But then Gen AI came, and everybody thinks, hey, now we don't need data anymore. So the Gen AI models work without data, and that's the biggest misunderstanding, I guess. Focusing on something which is super hyped and then not understanding what is required for that, which leads me to the other lesson that whatever we did with AI, the OT-IT convergence is for an AI project in manufacturing always foundational. Why? It's not about pulling the data one time and doing some analytics and get some insights, and that helps you from an enterprise consulting perspective. No, it's totally, you need to have that at runtime at the non-functional requirements of the process, so real time or whatever. And that's hard. So you need to have access format, semantics, integration processed in real time. And that leads me to the next thing, what we learned, and everybody, I think, learns over time. When you then at the model level and you generate those models, people still think you do that once, but the reality is industrial processes move forward. There are variants, and you need the models. You need to monitor the performance and then really upgrade the models with new data you collect from the process. And for that, you need to build an end-to-end pipeline, and you need the infrastructure for that. Digital twin is the other part which can help you there when you work with, when you create training data by creating synthetic data for edge cases, which are very hard to capture from the real world environments. And then also when it comes to inferencing at the edge, to have some guardrails through physical simulation is really super helpful, what we learned. And then from when we talk from a scale perspective, responsible AI and cyber security are non-negotiables. So the earlier you bring them in, the quicker you will be at the overall experience or overall progress of your project.
That's very fascinating, Gerald. And I think you touched upon quite a few things that have come up in a lot of the conversations that I've had with the leaders as well. It's the just first of all going and explaining what the AI is, and I think that education part never stops, right? And partly it is you're trying to bring a new cohort of people to the use cases that you're trying to develop, and partly, right, like they don't have an exposure to those kind of things, and so they need to, there is a little bit of an upfront education that is needed on what the art of possible. And I think the other thing that you talked about is it's easier to do like a one-time data pull and analysis, but it is a completely different thing to have the data available in real time and then setting up the entire infrastructure, setting up the cybersecurity aspect of it. So those are like some very fascinating points, and it at least resonates with me in terms of the conversations that I've had with quite a few folks. So just talking about that, right, and given the challenges that you talked about, industrials often get labeled as a slow adopter of new technologies. From your experience, is that a fair characterization, or are you seeing a faster adoption now, especially post-COVID, especially all the supply chain shocks that the industry has gone through in the last 5-7 years?
Tricky question. I would say, looking at that, so from my experience in the industry, so the biggest challenge we have also when we want to create or collect workforce or attract workforce is that the industry is often not understood as it should be. So, and which is very different for consumer industries or consumer market products and goods. So, therefore, historically, I think people get the impression. But when you look into the industry, so the equipment life cycles are longer, and then there's more regulation and safety requirements in manufacturing, and you always you operate on legacy systems, and even if you build a greenfield, every greenfield has its own legacy to capture. So and it's everything what you do needs to be extremely cost efficient. So bringing all those parameters to optimize a solution that takes more time. So some industries are cutting edge. You mentioned you have a lot of experience in semiconductor, or if you go automotive, working in those industries, they always want the latest tech there. Others maybe in certain types of process or mining or so, even there they adopt, but not everywhere. COVID, since you mentioned that, further sped up because we got that pressure to come out with new vaccines and also prepare the supply chain, that showed we had to drill into what can be done. And what we learned is you can change resilience over cost efficiency. What we mean with that is you don't want to optimize across offshoring and everything. You reduce or adjust your supply chain. It costs a little bit more, but you gain more resilience. And then on the other hand, the investment in zero touch production and remote operations is something what we see, which brings us forward a lot when we come to reduced workforce. So everything through COVID was not only based on COVID, I think it will be a further accelerator for the next wave we are seeing in the AI adoption.
Perfect. And I really like the sort of the metric that you put out there, resilience over cost efficiency. It's an interesting way to sort of look at it, right? Because of course, right, like, a lot of industrials do work on, thinner margins, and, resilience is a sort of the need of the hour given all the disruptions. So thinking of it in that point of view is an interesting view. So actually then thinking about that and the ROI, From your experience, where do industrial companies getting the biggest ROI for AI today? Is it like in the traditional use cases like predictive maintenance, which have been there for a long time, quality control, or there are some like really new cases that are emerging, which is getting people more excited?
You are spot on with your use cases. So when we talk about ROI, it's always something I always remind myself that we talk about net savings minus implementation costs. So you need to look into, and we do that. I recommend it every time to look into what is the net savings potential in your process and where do you start from. If you have already a highly optimized system and you go in and apply AI, even if you have a sophisticated rule-based systems, maybe you won't gain that much on top. So we often see customers extremely highly optimized already on those traditional use cases versus non-optimized. But let's say we walk in non-optimized. In use cases, predictive maintenance is absolutely the front runner. So it's something, it accompanies me for the last decade. We build solutions. So we have so many solutions in the portfolio to adjust really where predictive maintenance intelligence needs to be deployed at the edge, at the cloud, central, across lines, across factories. And what we see typically is that you can reduce unplanned downtime, and that could be in automotive 1 million per hour, and you can reduce 20% of that. So you see those industries are already very highly optimized, but it's also 25% in reduction of maintenance costs, or then also 30% reduction of spare part inventory costs, or that type, what we see typically, followed by, as you mentioned, energy optimization. Why? Because pushed usually by new regulatory requirements on sustainability, and sustainability and energy go often hand in hand, which is good overall. And because when you look into sustainability, you also reduce your overall energy cost. And we have so many processes with heat or high energy demand, and you won't get these high percentages there. But when you look in so the ratio is not that high, but when you look into the absolutes, what you can save, it's massive. Quality control, absolutely. We see that all over the places. First, quality control was only at the end of the manufacturing line. What's happening now is with the defect detection and anomaly detection with cameras. For example, you go early in the process, deploy that, and step by step, and so you can maybe even go after the holy grail to adjust on tolerances, avoiding scrap, or adjust or quickly eject early to avoid waste of energy. But it doesn't stop there. So as I mentioned, often AI is already hidden somewhere. So when we look into our control systems where we help manufacturers in additive manufacturing, 3D printing, they go up to 40% improvements on their parameters internally, or faster processing time, CNC milling machines, material waste reduction by up to 20% and 50% speed up on the tool path. We talked about supply chain. So here, especially with improved forecasting, the stockouts could be reduced by 30%, and you can reduce the inventory. What gives you more manufacturing space? Those would be some examples I would mention here.
Perfect. Yeah, and I think as you see, and a lot of what you talked about, right, is the AI, the machine learning, and different applications of looking at the data. Are you seeing like some early emerging use cases around like agentic AI that can be applied in a manufacturing setup to improve performance, or it's way too early to call that out?
So actually, when you look into what we are doing with our copilots for production and so on, so those are all going towards agentic AI systems. And we are early. We try to be ahead here. We see it's not easy. So, but when you look into copilots for engineering, where you start there across the value chain with engineering systems and support what you know today for coding, but you need to code in the automation languages and domain-specific languages. And then you come over to operation production and afterwards predictive maintenance. You get agents or copilots deployed on every product and then specific ones for the process. And what we need to sort out for the future is how those will interact as a global agentic solution. At the moment, they come in at every product.
Very interesting. Now, evolving some of these use cases, right? I think there are a lot of companies, especially on the industrial ecosystem, who are interested in exploring a lot of these solutions. But at the same time, I think a lot of these use cases get stuck in the pilot phase, and a lot of time, right? Like it doesn't move beyond the pilot phase. Where do you think are the most common pitfalls that keep AI projects stuck in this pilot phase? And what are the practical steps that you have seen companies can take to move beyond it for a successful large-scale implementation?
Yeah, you always have the hard questions here. So I think this one is I would start with what I see most of the time, and we make in the early phases we ran through that ourselves on the R&D departments. Misaligned strategy and readiness and the scale of AI. Why? Because AI, you treat AI as a tactical experiment. You go somewhere, have your front runner teams, and they create a prototype, and then they prove, hey, we can achieve at a certain lab scenario impact with AI, and now it's time to roll that out. But besides that, nobody thought about, hey, when I really do that across my company, what type of data do I need at what quality? And I need to have a whole data and AI strategy. And then how well are my processes described today in a way that a machine could interpret that? And that's where we see then when you go from the lab out to the real field, where you bring in then real world data samples, which are very different often from site to site, the biggest potential for failure. And that happens as well when you work with partners. So what we see is AI is something where people think it will mix up the ecosystems and change everything. So you bring in external partners with AI expertise, but no domain expertise, and then you get great pilots. But the people don't bake in already the experience of the domain. That is often an issue. Or as today, everybody looks at ChatGPT. So we have the hammer and we look, let's call it over resilience on hype tools, where we want to find something because that's so popular, but we overlook the whole universe of AI and what's already there, what we overlooked the last 10 years, what we could apply tomorrow, and it would work perfectly. And the other one, when we walk in at larger corporations, especially, is that we have innovation teams, and then you have the digital thread, and we explain them the digital thread of manufacturing with all the different nuances, and then they notice that they only focus on one single step. So, and they don't focus when they apply that methodology, that they focus on the whole value chain internally or the vertical integration. How can we go beyond that? That's your second part of the question. I would say it's not different here than with any other big mega trends. So we need to bring together technology, people, and process. And we need to, first recommendation is always go away from technical proof of concepts with artificial data sets or simplified data sets and go into proof of value on a real world scenario. So really go in, where's the real world problem? Take that, pull out the real data you have there and look at that. And so that's the first part, because it shows you already that you are much closer and that you dig into the right problems, bring in the right partner there as well. Have a clear governance and sponsorship for scale in place. When you understand what AI means, and you need to bring in the AI infrastructure, AI governance, AI training data creation, and that part. If you do that for your core processes, you need funding for that, you need people for that, that you don't have that usually planned today. And that brings me then to the investment part, that you, once you understand that you create new capabilities and invest in standardized data infrastructure, data quality, and leverage industrial grade platforms for that at the edge and at the cloud. That would be my high level advice here.
No, and that's very interesting, and I think a lot of it leads to the sort of the next topic that I wanted to talk about, right? Because one of the key reasons for this getting stuck in the pilot phase is data is messy, and the people and the talent that you need for the change management is sometimes not there. And I think you covered a lot about at least setting up the right data infrastructure, but it's a real industrial problem, right? And at least one of the things that we found out why the data is messy is because a lot of times industrial companies are grown through small acquisitions here and there, right? Or small units here and there. And everyone is coming with their own sort of ERP, MRP, data infrastructure. And it becomes a little complicated with variety of legacy systems where data resides, and there is no consistency. How do you tackle situations like that? Or is there where your strong partner network comes in to at least enable and help iron out the data issues and build a right data repository for the companies that you partner with?
You're on the spot here. Yeah, you really described our real world in manufacturing, where one manufacturer buys others and then buy all the technical debt or the different systems. And so how can we help here or get through that? I think the first requirement through AI is always, and then working backwards to create for the specific use cases where we consider the biggest value or solve the problem, to create a high quality data foundation first. So really stick with the use case. What data do you need? Work backwards from the data sources wherever they sit. And then you discover often, maybe, as you mentioned, in the legacy environment, I would need those data sets, but those data sets don't exist today. So, and then, so that's the first thing, and you need to more or less tap into those data. And for that, we have the ecosystem, but we have at the moment a whole set of portfolio, which makes that super easy. The next part, once you get to those raw data, it's contextualization, which is the biggest issue in the existing data sources, so that you get a bunch of raw data, but they are not, you don't know what the semantics of the data is, and you need to add those semantics first in the manual way. Unfortunately, the IT tools often don't work here, and all the trained models on open source often fail because industrial data are different, and we work, and our ecosystem works there to create those tools to help you with that step. But that's crucial to empower then high-level data analytics and AI on top of the data. And that leads to the next way, where you work more on the organizational process side by creating governance and self-service in your company, where so the data pools need to be created, training data sets for AI need to be curated, and that should work in a federated way, where you orchestrate that across your lines and then factories and even at the global scale. And what we recommend, of course, is once you get to that level, do you really invest in, or you can make your life easier by investing in standardized infrastructure, especially, therefore, I mentioned our industrial edge cloud platform, which helps you so much on, first of all, collecting the data, transforming the data, contextualizing the data, which you need then to inference a model and monitor the model at the edge. If you need that, could do the same thing at the cloud and train data at the cloud. So this is what I would recommend here.
No, that's very interesting. And I think part of this you've already answered, but a lot of industrial leaders, talk about, is it better for me to think about and implement an opportunistic use case, or is it better for me to think of, adopting this more enterprise-wide? Of course, there are pros and cons of, both of these approaches. One gives you very immediate short-term return, but you may have to overhaul the system if you're thinking about taking it to other areas. But the other one sets the right foundations, and it takes a little bit longer to get to the impact that you're looking for. How do you advise companies that you work with on what is the right balance?
Um, it so first that requires consulting. The right balance, as you said, is if you first of all you need to be opportunistic. So you need to prove the value. And I also beside opportunistic and holistic, I also look into and say, hey, what is short term? Because it seems in the industry, everybody at the moment has some financial pressure and wants short term, low hanging fruit output. So the opportunistic part is the candidate for that. So look first into that area and go after that, because that establishes trust over time. But as said, and what we learn, and that's something where the boardroom expectations often don't meet the real world, is you need to go holistically and establish that infrastructures, or establish the right partner in your company taking care of that. So in my opinion, recommendation is the mix. So start with both. We do the same thing. Take opportunistic approaches short term to show some progress, but go on, figure out what is really core for you on your golden nuggets, and what would AI mean there, and prepare that infrastructure holistically for your enterprise.
No, that's very helpful. And Gerald, one last question, right? I think if you step back and if you think about like next 5 years, 10 years, do you believe that AI and adoption of AI will differentiate leaders versus laggards in the industrial ecosystem? As well as, what will be your sort of one piece of advice for CXOs who are looking to embark on this AI journey right now?
So when I hear that, I always, when I'm coming back where I started at academia, and at that time there was a guy in the US called Mark Weiser, and he was driving something what was called ubiquitous computing, and he made a nice statement. So he said, the most profound technologies are those that disappear. So they weave themselves into the fabric of the everyday life. And that's something what sticks to my mind since then. So it was the same with cloud computing. And when you think about electricity, plumbing, the internet, when those came up, voice over IP, cloud, and it will be the same with the current AI boom. So the AI technology will be extremely impactful, will change everything. And but it will disappear in certain products which we use on a daily life. So what my advice here is, and therefore it will definitely, to come to your question, separate everyone who adopts it versus the laggards, because they will disappear. AI will impact everything, but it doesn't mean that you need to apply AI to every process. So you need to open your eye on the ecosystem and see which products or new tools change the game in the ecosystem, and then adopt that. But you definitely have one of your core products in-house where you need to be that transformative force. So that, I think, I try to answer that here in that part. And the real important advice, or how can we get there before we come to the important advice, is to say, be very transparent, because AI could also mean that we people get scared and don't apply it. So empower a culture of experimentation, and explain to everybody, employer and employee, it's not about replacing the workforce, it's about empowering the workforce, because the empowered workforce will replace other companies not doing that. So the competition level is at a different part, and that will sort more or less then change how it plays out in the ecosystem. My final Final advice is get started with AI, get trained, and prepare an AI strategy for your core business and focus on proof of value for real world use cases and try to measure that end to end. That would be my single sentence for get started.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Gerald, and sincerely appreciate you taking our time out to connect with us on this podcast series. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me, Vineet. It was a pleasure talking to you, and anytime soon. Looking forward.